We've heard many incredible stories where crimes were solved after years, sometimes even decades, thanks to the tireless efforts and persistence of both families and investigators. But have you ever wondered what it would feel like if the roles were reversed? If instead of solving a mystery, you were tormented for over 10 years by someone who simply refused to let you go? Lin Zuoxian once believed he was the happiest child in the world. Of course, many kids feel that way growing up, but his background was truly unique. His maternal grandfather, Guo Mu Gui, was the richest man in Taitung County. His mother, Guo Fu Mei, had been a pampered, well-protected daughter her whole life. But his father's background was unexpected. Back in those days, marriages were all about social status. Families had to be equally matched. Yet Fu Mei broke tradition and lived out her own rich girl falls for poor boy story, choosing to marry a driving instructor named Lin Dashen without hesitation. Luckily, Dashen wasn't incompetent, he just lacked opportunity. With financial help from his wealthy father-in-law and his own business savvy, Dashen jumped straight into entrepreneurship. He left his old job behind and started a business. In just a few short years, he founded a transportation company in Taipei, later bought out a moving service chain and a tour bus company, and completely reinvented himself as a successful business owner. At home, Dashen and Fu Mei seemed like a loving couple. They eventually had 6 children together, with Zuoxian being the eldest son. So for Zuoxian, growing up in luxury, surrounded by a big happy family, life truly felt perfect. But as we all know, nothing in life is ever completely perfect. In their family, the imperfection was Fu Mei's vision. Tragically, when she was a child, she fell from a swing and suffered a brain hemorrhage that caused a blood clot to press against her optic nerve. Over time, her vision worsened. By the time Zuoxian was in middle school, Fu Mei was almost completely blind and had to stay home to care for the children. The entire family business, everything they had built together, fell entirely on Dashen's shoulders. Already a busy man, he became even more absent from home. At first, he still made the effort to come home late at night, but gradually Zuoxian barely saw his father. Instead, a young woman named Li Yue Gui moved into the Lin household. What did she do? According to Dashen, she was the live-in help, someone he had hired to take care of the family. At least, that's what the kids were told. To be fair, Yue Gui was energetic, always buzzing around the house, quick to do chores, and affectionately called Fu Mei Big Sister, with a bright, cheerful smile. But Zuoxian, as the eldest son, saw through the charade. Yue Gui wasn't a housekeeper. She was his father's mistress. As mentioned earlier, Dashen owned a tour bus company. One day, while doing a routine inspection, he met Yue Gui, who was working as a hostess for one of the buses. She was 18 years younger than him. The moment he laid eyes on her, he was smitten. Without hesitation, he transferred her into the company's finance department. Yue Gui, a clever woman, immediately understood what the boss wanted and played along without resistance. And just like that, the two of them started a full-blown affair. They didn't even bother hiding it from the people around them. Zuoxian visited his father's company a few times and kept running into Yue Gui. Even then, he felt there was something a little too close between her and his father. But never in his wildest dreams did he imagine his dad would actually move her into their home. Now you're probably wondering, did Fu Mei know? Come on, think about it. If even the high school-aged eldest son could tell what was going on, how could the wife, the real lady of the house, not know? But what will surprise you is how she reacted. Maybe it was because she had lost her eyesight and could no longer care for the children. Maybe it was because Yue Gui treated the kids kindly. Whatever the reason, Fu Mei didn't cry, didn't fight, didn't even scream. Instead, she calmly gave up the master bedroom to her husband's mistress, willingly, and silently accepted that Dashen would now be sharing that bed with another woman under the same roof. Now that's composure. Painful, quiet composure. But while Fu Mei might have tolerated the situation, her grown son Zuoxian couldn't. He and his father Dashen got into a huge argument over it. When Zhuo Xian confronted him, Da Shen slapped him hard across the face and even threatened to cut off his tuition. But don't let Zhuo Xian's age fool you. He had backbone. You want to stop paying for my tuition? Don't bother. I'm out of here. If this place doesn't want me, there are other places that will. I'm gone. And just like that, Zhuo Xian, who had always been an outstanding student, dropped out of Dan High School and ran off on his own to Dihua Street in Taipei, where he started selling goods for Lunar New Year. Fortunately, his former homeroom teacher was a truly caring person. After learning the real reason why Zhuo Xian had run away, the teacher made several trips to Dihua Street to talk him into returning. Eventually, he succeeded. But when Zhuo Xian stepped back into his home, he was stunned. You wouldn't believe it if you didn't see it with your own eyes. The once warm, lively family home had become a literal shell. Empty walls, empty rooms. It turned out the family business had been struggling for a long time, but their father had kept everyone in the dark. Failure in business is nothing new. Plenty of people fall and get back up. But what Da Shen did next was inexcusable. He took out high-interest loans from loan sharks. Even worse, before the debt collectors came knocking, he emptied out the family's savings, took off with Yue Gui, and fled back to his hometown in Taitung to hide out. Left behind in that empty home were Fu Mei, now completely blind, and her injured, mistreated children, victims of Yue Gui's abuse. When the loan sharks finally showed up, they cleaned the place out, taking anything of value. From that point on, the family hit rock bottom. Their once comfortable lifestyle was gone. They suffered through endless hardship. Zhuo Xian and his eldest sister had to drop out of school and start working to help the family survive. After years of grinding effort, they finally managed to pay off the debts and stabilize their lives. Just a little. But right when things were starting to get better, Da Shen returned. He knelt down in front of Fu Mei, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. He said he should never have left his wife and children. He swore that he had changed and wanted to come back for good. Touched by his regret, and because she always wished her children could grow up in a complete family, Fu Mei relented. She agreed to reconcile with Da Shen. But almost immediately after she said yes, Da Shen made a new request. He wanted Fu Mei to go back with him to Taitung. Why? So she could ask her wealthy father for money. Predictably, Fu Mei agreed once again. And so, in December 1984, Fu Mei traveled with Da Shen by car to Taitung. But what the 6 children left behind could never have expected was that they would never see their mother again. The first to sense something was wrong was, once again, Zhuo Xian. After their mother left, no one heard from her. No phone calls, no letters. She had vanished. As the end of December approached, the kids thought maybe they could reach out to their father and ask him to come home in time to celebrate Fu Mei's birthday. But Da Shen had disappeared off the face of the earth, completely unreachable. Then, on December 21st, as the 6 siblings tried to figure out what to do, Zhuo Xian received a sudden phone call from his uncle. "Your mother has passed away. Come to Kaohsiung immediately." The children were in total shock. What happened? For anyone with even a hint of intuition, this situation already seemed suspicious. After all, Fu Mei's father was incredibly wealthy. Even if Da Shen had gone bankrupt, it didn't make sense for the family to fall into complete ruin. And even if Da Shen had abandoned them, surely Fu Mei and the kids could have turned to her family for support. Why didn't her father step in to help? Actually, the reason was simple and painfully obvious. Let's revisit the question. When a wealthy heiress chooses to marry a poor man, does the family approve? Fu Mei had defied her family to be with Da Shen. Now, after being abandoned and humiliated, how could she face them again? Despite reconciling with Da Shen, the idea of asking her family for money weighed heavily on her pride. What she didn't expect was this. When she arrived back in Taitung, she saw Yue Gui. No matter how naive she might have been, Fu Mei immediately realized her husband's remorse was nothing but a lie. His true motive for bringing her back was to use her to beg her wealthy father for money. In that moment, Fu Mei made a firm decision. She would not ask her family for a single cent. Upon hearing this, Da Shen said nothing. It was likely what he expected all along, but Yue Gui was far less composed. One day, while Da Shen was out working, Fu Mei was taking a bath alone. Yue Gui took the opportunity to pour an entire pot of boiling water into the tub. Fu Mei suffered severe burns, which later led to sepsis, kidney failure, and ultimately, death. These were the words Fu Mei relayed to her family in her final moments. Naturally, Yue Gui denied everything. Her version of the story? Fu Mei had gone to take a bath by herself. Since she was blind, she had accidentally stepped into a tub filled with scalding water and slipped, causing her injuries. Yue Gui claimed that upon hearing Fu Mei's cries for help, she rushed in and took her to the hospital, implying she had actually done a good deed, not a crime. But when police began their investigation, several suspicious details came to light. For instance, Fu Mei's typical bathing habit was to mix hot and cold water to the right temperature, then scoop it over herself little by little. She almost never soaked in the tub, and even if she had chosen to soak that day, the water level in the tub was only about 10 inches deep. If someone were to step in and feel extreme heat, they'd naturally step out right away. So how could she have suffered burns over 90% of her body? This strongly supported the truth of Fu Mei's deathbed statement. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence, there was still one person who refused to believe it: Da Shen. After her death, he insisted Fu Mei's passing had been a tragic accident. He even hired a lawyer to defend Yue Gui. Meanwhile, Fu Mei's family brought in her cousin, Li Yongran, a well-known attorney, to seek justice on her behalf. Though the truth of the case seemed clear, there was still a lack of direct evidence. After all, it was true that Yue Gui took Fu Mei to the hospital, and that fact alone slightly weakened the prosecution's argument that she had premeditated intent to kill. In the end, Yue Gui was found guilty, but only sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. On the other hand, Fu Mei's family situation was truly heartbreaking. After her death, Da Shen completely abandoned his 6 children. Meanwhile, Fu Mei's relatives, resentful toward Da Shen, wanted nothing to do with his kids either. As a result, Zuoxian and his siblings technically still had a family, but their lives were even harder than those of orphans. Not wanting to rely on their grandfather for support, the eldest daughter, Lin Qiuling, and the eldest son, Zuoxian, called a family meeting. In the end, all 6 children made a unanimous decision to voluntarily apply to live in an orphanage. And here's the part that's genuinely admirable. Even though life in the orphanage was tough, every one of the 6 siblings gave it their all. Not a single one of them dropped out of school. To ease the financial burden, the oldest 3, Qiuling, Zuoxian, and their younger brother Lin Zuoyi, enrolled in tuition-free teacher training programs. They worked part-time jobs to help support their 3 younger sisters' education. Whenever someone's birthday came around or a holiday approached, the siblings would gather together to celebrate. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was full of warmth and love. That is, until one fateful day. One afternoon, Zuoxian was reading the newspaper in the school library like he always did. A headline caught his eye: "Wife throws child out of train window after marital dispute." Sure, newspapers often use sensational headlines to attract readers. But it wasn't the headline that made Zuoxian's heart skip a beat, it was the photo accompanying it. Because the woman in the picture was none other than Yue Gui, the very woman who was supposed to be in prison. At first, Zuoxian thought maybe the woman just looked like her. But the moment he read the full article, fury boiled up inside him. You've probably guessed why. That woman wasn't just someone who resembled Yue Gui. She was Yue Gui. And the reason she wasn't behind bars? Somehow, against all odds, she'd received 2 major sentence reductions while serving time. She was released after just 1 year and 10 months. Once out, she wasted no time reconnecting with her former lover Da Shen. The 2 even had a child together. And that's when things got strange. To outsiders, it might have seemed like Da Shen truly loved Yue Gui. But for some unknown reason, no matter how devoted Yue Gui acted, Da Shen refused to legally marry her. Furious, Yuegui returned to her parents' home. But if you followed her story so far, you know this woman didn't take rejection lightly. On her way back to her family, Yuegui threw her and Dashen's 1-year-old son out of a moving train. Fortunately, trains back then were slower, and the child survived after being rescued. But the head trauma left him with severe cognitive disabilities. What's even more outrageous is that Yuegui once again escaped serious punishment. Even though her actions clearly constituted attempted murder, the court declared her mentally ill just as charges were about to be filed. And just like that, she avoided prison a second time. No one really knows whether Yuegui was truly mentally ill, but one thing's for sure. Dashen must have been out of his mind. This was the same man who had refused to marry her before. But after she threw their child out of a train, he suddenly changed his mind and made her his legal wife. By this point, Zhuo Xian and his siblings had completely seen through their father. To them, he was nothing more than a deeply broken man. So, they made a unanimous decision to cut all ties with him for good. The 6 siblings stood united, supporting and encouraging one another through the hardest years of their lives. And after more than a decade of relentless effort, their resilience paid off. Zhuo Xian, the eldest, earned a PhD, became a professor at Mingchuan University, and even started his own tech company. His younger brother, Lin Zhuoyi, earned a doctorate in law. Their sister, Lin Qingying, began publishing books. Each sibling found success in their own field. More importantly, their bond remained as strong as ever, just like when they were children in the orphanage. At this point, you might be thinking this story has wrapped up with a warm, inspiring ending. But a few years later, horror struck once again. In the summer of 2004, Zhuo Xian, now a father himself, was playing with his newborn daughter when the doorbell rang. He opened the door, and suddenly, someone collapsed into the doorway, their entire body covered in red. His baby burst into tears in terror. Zhuo Xian, equally shaken, froze for a moment. Then, as he looked closer, a chilling realization hit him. The red figure was his father, Dashen, a man he hadn't seen in over 10 years. Dashen didn't explain how he had found his son's address. He just begged for help. He claimed that Yuegui was now a raging alcoholic, regularly abusing him. He said she had beaten him so badly, he'd lost control of his bladder and bowels. On top of that, he had suffered a stroke and now desperately needed his son's protection. But Zhuo Xian hadn't forgotten what this man had done, or the pain he had caused. He knew both Dashen and Yuegui were dangerous people. Getting involved with them again could only mean trouble. Still, Zhuo Xian did what he believed was the decent thing. He didn't let Dashen stay, but he did call the police, filed for a protective order on his father's behalf, and arranged for him to be placed in a nursing home. Considering everything Dashen had put his children through, Zhuo Xian had already gone far above and beyond what anyone would expect. But guess what happened next? Just a few days after settling into the nursing home, Dashen quietly ran away. And where did he go? Back to Yuegui. No one knows what happened between them during that reunion. But on the morning of November 13th, 2004, Zhuo Xian was jolted awake by a phone call from an unknown number. Half asleep, he answered, and immediately, horrifying memories came rushing back, just like the day he learned about his mother's death. On the other end, someone said, "This is the police. You need to come down here immediately. Your father has been killed." Hours later, Zhuo Xian found himself at the morgue, standing over what was left of his father. But the body was so mangled, so unrecognizable, that even Dashen's own mother wouldn't have been able to identify him, let alone his son. He had been beaten hundreds of times with a rice cooker and liquor bottles. That they were able to identify the body at all was a miracle. Naturally, your first guess might be that the killer was Yuegui. That's exactly what Zhuo Xian thought too. But when he arrived at the police station to see the suspect, he was stunned. The killer wasn't Yuegui. It was her son, the child who had survived being thrown from a moving train. The same boy who had suffered severe brain damage. Because of her. According to the police, the boy's mother confessed that the killing was the result of her son suddenly having a violent episode, Cases of patricide are extremely rare, especially when it's the mother accusing her own child, so the police initially had no reason to doubt her story. But Zhuo Xian knew better. He knew that Boy's mother was none other than Yue Gui, a woman capable of anything. Realizing what might be happening, Zhuo Xian immediately told the police everything, how Yue Gui had murdered his mother, Fu Mei, and how she once threw her own infant son off a moving train. The officers were stunned, almost unable to believe what they were hearing, but they took it seriously and launched a more thorough investigation. Soon they discovered two major red flags. First, the call to report the murder came from Yue Gui's son. While he had cognitive disabilities, he wasn't completely unaware, just mentally slower than most. There was no way someone with his condition would knowingly report a murder he committed himself. Second, neighbors living near Yue Gui testified that during the time of the murder, they heard the sound of furniture being smashed and loud screaming. More chillingly, they distinctly heard Da Shen pleading for his life, and the voice of a woman yelling furiously, "Die! I'm going to kill you!" Everyone agreed. That voice sounded exactly like Yue Gui. A few hours after the murder, the police brought Yue Gui in for questioning, but she stuck to her story, that her son had lost control, and refused to say another word. When her legally allotted interrogation time ran out, she simply stood up and walked out, as if nothing had happened. Faced with this, her son could no longer keep the secret. He quietly told officers the truth. He had witnessed the entire killing. Based on his statement, the police immediately brought him back to the house to reconstruct the crime scene. Despite his condition, the boy spoke with surprising clarity and consistency. He recounted that on the night before the murder, Yue Gui had been out drinking. She came home drunk and immediately started demanding money from Da Shen. When he refused, they argued. She insulted him, calling him a useless freeloader, which enraged Da Shen to the point where he tried to leave. That's when Yue Gui grabbed him, threw him to the ground, and began beating him, eventually killing him. It was clear that someone with cognitive impairment could not have made up a story with such precise and consistent details. Still, the police sought further confirmation. They ordered a blood test on Yue Gui to check for alcohol levels, and the results showed she had indeed been heavily intoxicated at the time. At the same time, forensic experts released their findings. On the murder weapons, a rice cooker and several liquor bottles, only Yue Gui's fingerprints were found, no one else's. It was now undeniable. Yue Gui acted alone, and yet she remained eerily composed. Even when the case went to trial, she refused to confess. In fact, she cracked a joke in court. She told the judge, Da Shen had severe gout. He couldn't take the pain anymore, so he hit himself in the head with a rice cooker. No one believed her, of course. But because Yue Gui was diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder, and now also with mild intellectual disability, despite the gravity of her crime, the judge's hands were tied. She was ultimately sentenced to 14 years in prison, plus 3 additional years of psychiatric supervision. The reason things turned out this way was because some media outlets reported that after Da Shen's death, Zhuo Xian didn't immediately go to the hospital to claim the body, accusing him of failing to fulfill his duty as a son. There were even critics who said that when his father was suffering from domestic abuse, Zhuo Xian didn't step in to protect him, calling him an ungrateful, heartless son. Those words nearly pushed Zhuo Xian to the brink of suicide due to depression. Thankfully, with the unwavering support of his siblings, he eventually pulled through. Years later, Zhuo Xian and his younger brother Lin Zuoyi appeared on the true crime show I Was at the Crime Scene and gave an emotional interview on Sincere Debate. Facing the camera, he no longer looked bitter nor angry. Zhuo Xian spoke candidly. He said that today, he has forgiven everything. Even though the law may never have delivered true justice, he and his siblings have chosen to carry on their mother's legacy with love and hope. Together with their eldest sister Lin Qiuling, their sister Lin Qingying, and others, they founded the Fumei Cultural Education Foundation, dedicated to education, publishing, and public service. To this day, you can still find the Fumei Foundation online, as if this strong, resilient mother never truly left. And that brings us to the end of this strange and heartbreaking case. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.